Before the first farm, before the first city, before the first written word, humans built a temple. 12,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers with stone tools dragged 16-ton pillars into place and carved them with symbols we still cannot fully decode. They were not building shelter, they were not storing grain, they were worshipping something. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and it overturns one of our most basic assumptions about civilization. We always assumed religion came after agriculture, after cities, after writing, that gods were invented by settled people with too much time on their hands. Göbekli Tepe says otherwise. The temple came first. Religion did not emerge from civilization. Civilization may have emerged from religion. But here is what makes this truly remarkable. Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated case. Across every continent in every era separated by oceans and millennia, human civilizations have independently arrived at the same conclusion. Something greater exists. The Sumerians called it Anu, the Egyptians Ra, the Hindus described Brahman, the Chinese spoke of Tian or heaven. Aristotle, using pure reason alone, argued for an unmoved mover, a first cause that set everything in motion. Aboriginal Australians carried the concept of dreamtime for 40,000 years through oral tradition alone. No contact between these civilizations, no shared texts, no cultural exchange, yet the same intuition again and again, a supreme being, transcendent, morally authoritative, creative. In our last episode, we explored how conscious minds seem designed to ask questions that go beyond the physical world. Now we follow where that questioning leads. If this intuition is universal, we have to ask why. Is it a coincidence, an evolutionary accident, or is it evidence of something real? Let us look at what the data actually shows. In 2019, researchers at the University of Oxford published a study in Current Anthropology that should have made headlines. They analysed 60 societies from every major world region, cultures with no known contact with each other, and they found 7 moral rules that appeared in all of them. Help your family, help your group, return favours, be brave, defer to legitimate authority, divide resources fairly, respect others' property. Not one society considered any of these rules morally wrong. Not one. In 2024, the study was extended using machine learning analysis to 256 societies. Same result. And a separate study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences tested 70,000 participants across 42 countries. Again, universal moral intuitions about harm, fairness, loyalty, and sanctity. C.S. Lewis, the Oxford scholar and former atheist, anticipated this finding decades earlier. He called it the moral law. Not that every culture agrees on every detail, they do not, but that every culture recognizes that some things are objectively right and objectively wrong. Lewis put it this way: if the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning. Just as if there were no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should never know it was dark. The implications are not just academic. In 1945, after World War II, Nazi leaders were put on trial at Nuremberg. Their defense was simple. We followed German law. Everything we did was legal under our government. The prosecution had to appeal to something higher, a universal moral law that transcends national law. If morality is merely a cultural invention, if it is just whatever your society says it is, then the Nuremberg trials were an act of cultural imperialism. The fact that we instinctively reject that conclusion tells us something about the nature of morality itself. Now let us turn to harder evidence. Physical artifacts, documents, things you can hold in your hand. Consider this comparison. Caesar's Gallic Wars, we have 10 manuscript copies. The earliest was written 1,000 years after Caesar lived. Plato's complete works, 7 manuscripts, 1,200-year gap. Homer's Iliad, 643 manuscripts, 500-year gap. The New Testament, 5,800 Greek manuscripts, 24,000 total copies across all languages, and the earliest fragments date to within 130 years of the events they describe. This is the most extensively documented text in the ancient world, by an enormous margin. We do not question whether Caesar's Gallic Wars is a real historical document. We have 10 copies. If we apply the same standard of evidence consistently, the New Testament is the most historically attested document in antiquity. That is not a religious claim, That is a textual fact. And the physical evidence keeps mounting. In 1993, archaeologist Avraham Buran discovered the Tel Dan stele in northern Israel. It is an enemy inscription, written by the Arameans, Israel's adversaries, and it contains the phrase House of David, enemy testimony confirming King David's dynasty. In 1961, the Pilate stone was discovered at Caesarea Maritima, a limestone inscription confirming Pontius Pilate as the Roman governor of Judea. The Pool of Bethesda, described in the Gospel of John with specific architectural details, 5 porticos, was excavated and matched the description exactly. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1946 and 1956, contained copies of Hebrew scriptures dating to 200 years before Christ. When compared to medieval copies written 1,000 years later, the textual agreement was remarkable. The core text had survived a millennium of hand copying with extraordinary fidelity. Here is a historical fact that surprises most people. The founders of modern science were not working despite their faith. Their faith was the reason they did science at all. Johannes Kepler discovered the 3 laws of planetary motion. His motivation: he wrote, "I am merely striving to think God's thoughts after him." Kepler expected to find mathematical order in the cosmos because he believed a rational God had created a rational universe. Isaac Newton, arguably the greatest scientist who ever lived, spent more time on theological writings than on physics. He believed mathematical laws reflected divine order. Galileo, despite his famous conflict with the Catholic Church, was himself a Catholic believer. He saw scientific investigation as exploration of divine creation. He wrote, "The Bible shows the way to go to heaven, not the way the heavens go." And it was not just Christian Europe. During the Islamic Golden Age from the 8th to the 14th century, Muslim scholars advanced mathematics, astronomy, medicine and chemistry, while much of Europe was in its medieval period. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra. Our word algorithm comes from his name. Al-Razi pioneered clinical medicine. Al-Biruni calculated the Earth's radius with remarkable accuracy. Ibn Sina wrote medical texts that remained authoritative for centuries. All of them were explicitly motivated by theological conviction. The Quranic command to read to seek knowledge was understood as a religious obligation. The pattern is consistent across civilizations. The belief that a rational mind created the universe led directly to the conviction that the universe is comprehensible, and that conviction gave birth to science. There is one more pattern worth noticing. The ancient Greeks had a concept called logos, the rational principle underlying the universe. Heraclitus described it 500 years before Christ. The Hebrews had dabar, God's creative word. In Hinduism, Om represents the sacred sound as ultimate reality. In Islam, kalima describes divine speech as a creative force. Independent traditions, different languages, the same intuition. That reality is structured by something like a mind. Something like a word, something rational and purposeful at the foundation of everything. Now a skeptic will say all of this has a simpler explanation: evolutionary psychology, hyperactive agency detection. Our ancestors survived by assuming the rustling in the bushes was a predator rather than the wind. We are wired to see agents and intentions everywhere. Theory of mind gone wild. We project consciousness onto the universe because we cannot help it. And cultural transmission. Ideas spread. Religions copy each other. These are serious arguments. They deserve honest engagement. Evolution does explain why we have moral instincts, but it does not explain why morality feels like discovery rather than invention. Agency detection explains why we look for minds behind events, but it does not explain why the universe actually turns out to be mathematically ordered, as if a mind were behind it. Cultural transmission explains how ideas spread within connected cultures, but it does not explain why isolated civilizations, with no contact, arrive at the same conclusions independently. A 2014 analysis found that hyperactive agency detection plays no role in the intuitive appeal of theism. The explanation is more complex than a simple misfiring detector. No single piece of evidence in this episode proves God exists. That is not the claim. The claim is this: multiple independent lines of evidence converge on the same question. Religion predates civilization. Universal moral rules appear across isolated cultures. Independent civilizations develop supreme being concepts with similar attributes. Ancient philosophers arrive at a first cause by pure reason. Modern science was born from theological conviction. Historical documents are archaeologically confirmed with unprecedented manuscript evidence. Each of these facts has a possible naturalistic explanation, but the convergence of all of them, from anthropology, archaeology, philosophy, and the history of science, points towards something that demands more than a dismissive answer. History shows us that humans have always intuited a creator, but intuition is not proof. So in our next episode, we turn to biology, the information encoded in DNA, the unsolved origin of life, and the scientists, including the man who led the Human Genome Project, who followed the evidence from molecules to meaning. The temple at Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried by